Dog, I am genuinely hyped for this one. Billy Woods is the best abstract rapper in my opinion, and it ain't even that close. On top of his technical skill when it comes to rhyme scheme, and he has that unique delivery, I just think he's the best at honing in on a particular topic, and the fact that he uses his abstract style, I think that lets him dive into topics a lot deeper than someone with a more straightforward style can. And because of that, his music comes off as more poetic and layered than 99% of the rap that I listen to. Then on top of that, his album Atheos is an album of the year contender, so high hopes for this one. To be real with you, Billy Woods is so complex, I probably had no business even reacting to this. But if this is a good reaction, I'm gonna just start calling myself the bar whisperer. If it ain't, no, I can't do too much about it. Let's get it. This beat's pretty ominous already.
116 must have had the cops in their pocket. Hydro jars, 50 pop, line out the door. This back when we had the nerve to call brickweed chocolate. Stacy said his sister's boyfriend had the new hot shit. Gave me the plug like a stock tip. I found religion of a prophet. Loved that girl, but knew we wouldn't work like Harden on the Rockets. Clouds clear.
Yo, is this nigga punching out the gate? I love that gave me the plug like a stop tip line, and that James Harden line is hilarious.
Clouds cleared. I'm looking at the city like jihadis in the cockpit. Price is so fucking high, I had to do them dirty.
Relax. Relax. He said, I'm in the clouds looking at the city like jihadis in the cockpit. 9/11 reference. Ugh.
Splits like Spotify numbers. A whole lot of grain, just me and the punter.
Yo, why is he punching like this out the gate? He's good at storytelling, but I don't really know him for punching like this. I mean, he can punch, but I ain't really hear him punch like this before. He took a little jab at Spotify. He basically saying he getting fleeced on the drug prices.
By the grace of God, everybody else got caught. We was raised on Paraquat.
What's Paraquat? Hold on, that ain't nothing that Google can't fix. Paraquat is the pesticides they got in food. Alright, that's cool. All the real niggas was raised on pesticides and GMOs. Yeah, that's y'all new niggas who was raised on that organic and vegan stuff. I didn't even know what the word organic meant till I was like 18.
I didn't correct it. Brother started on that Malachi Z. I said I eat pork, and besides, I don't respect it. You out here smoking Newports, please, man, let me eat my breakfast.
Hey, it be like that. The suburban version of that. Supposed to be out here vegan, but do coke on the weekend.
We was raised on it, right?
Whoa.
Light drizzle on the tarmac.
Well, I wasn't expecting this.
Whitey hit Hiroshima, had a second chapter. Camo, green and gold, pull me in the skies to rapture. Anno Domini, know before, it's only after.
Heavy religious imagery right here. Hey, that's a sick opener. I think that song in and of itself displayed all the talents of Billy Woods. That first verse, he just did an amazing job of that imagery of his childhood. It was definitely abstract in nature, but it was like you were seeing different brushstrokes as a picture came together. He gave these really clever one-liners, and together they painted this picture of him growing up and hustling. Then it's kind of ironic. The first half of the song had pretty succinct and coherent, cohesive storytelling. He told this relatively linear story about him growing up and hustling, but the beat as he rapped on it was really abstract. Then on the second half of the song, the beat got really more tame as it was his jazzy loop, but then the storytelling on that otherwise really cohesive beat was really disjointed, and it was just a fragment here, fragment there, and it was this heavy religious imagery tied into it. I really rocked with that song. The lyricism was good. The production was unpredictable. Let's get into Artichoke.
There's certain things you can only learn from a fist fight. I used to use a toothbrush to keep my kicks white. It mattered that much.
That's a fact.
Seemed like someone else's life. Flush my system with sativas, knock off the rust, and fuck standing up white phosphorus.
He been reminiscing for sure.
The night, skeleton crew on a slave or hold the equator tight. Drone fly like metal kite, hellfire out the sky. Open your book to Revelations. Anyone hating this your chance to get right. Ceremony in the church.
That's gritty. He started with these lines reflecting back on his childhood, and it shifted pretty quickly. That slavers hugging the equator, that was a line referring to the transatlantic slave trade. And it looks like he's relating that to modern day colonialism, you know, with the drone strikes that America's been doing, really primarily in the Middle East. But he was like, the drones are like a metal kite. I love that imagery on there.
A lot of rappers worry about gender bending. I just people who ask the question.
You ain't got to go at Kid Cudi like that.
Just hope is an assassin. Fear fill up the casket. One day I woke up, everything was made of plastic.
I think with how bright and airy the production was on that song, it's easy to overlook how nihilistic the two verses were. I'm still getting the vibe that he's reflecting back on his childhood, but it seemed like there was some critiques on society sprinkled in too. He touched on both the slave trade and then colonialism, and I think he's relating that back into that inner city issues that he grew up in. Then he told a pretty captivating story in that second verse. It started out painting this funeral scene, and then it had a lot of imagery around all types of inner city violence. Then once again, a lot of religious imagery sprinkled in too. I like that song a lot. This is Swampwater.
Tell your boy I only want the trippy with the red hairs. Same one from when Giuliani was mayor. The science is clear. Words chosen more carefully when the threat of violence in the air.
That's a
Don't
fact.
wait till it's too late, come round to the fact you's a square. Me too, just try to be here and there. Over your grave, but boots change gears. The science is weird. Mayans never counted the hair. Dying sun glared through thin atmosphere. Windshield smeared, AC blasting old air.
I'm a fan of this production right here. I don't think this production is as outlandish as it was on Aethiops, but I think it's doing a phenomenal job of setting the soundscape for Billy Woods to paint these pictures with his lyricism. Not only did the production sound chaotic to go with this disjointed narrative that Billy Woods was rapping about, traffic was a central theme as he rapped about these different scenes taking place in New York. But it sounded like the horns on the instrumental sounded like horns on a car as opposed to a horn in an orchestra. And then, like I said, the verse itself was really disjointed. It was just one scene in New York after another. He was talking about prison, he was talking about traffic, and then it almost sounded like he was escaping all of that. He mentioned him flying out to LA, getting away from New York to go work with alchemists. And then on an even deeper level, it sounds like people are so occupied in New York with being busy that it kind of masks the terror that they would otherwise feel. I think that song was definitely an experience. This is Fever Grass.
House of hunger, cold stove. It's madness in the cupboards. It's no table manners at your cousins. In microwave ovens. It's auntie bent back from the juggling. Moms would send me over there with something mumbling about that deadbeat husband. Cuz was in the back bed trying to get 9 out of onion.
Love the imagery right there. He's slowly painting his portrait of him being over at his aunt's house. The little intricacies he's describing, the conversations that his aunt and his mom's having. He's describing the environment of that kitchen. And then they're completely oblivious to his cousin over here hustling in the other room.
I don't give a fuck how deep them troops is dug in. Deng Xiaoping's dead dogs dangle from lampposts, long tongues. Win or lose, the Maoists is still glum. Rain blood, we still lit like wet. My grandfather built God a house in the jungle, laid every brick, mixed cement out of pain and sweat, love, self-loathing, fear the best. My great-grandmother was a witch, but they came for poultice when they were sick. They came when baby was late or too early to save, but the mother lived.
Yo, that song was chaotic. It had 3 slight changes in the beat. Each beat, they weren't completely different beat. There were more modulations, but each portion of the beat got more and more chaotic. And to match that, it seemed like Billy Wood went from really lucid, reminiscent to this train of thought where he had a lot of war and I don't know if this is Viet Cong or like Chinese imagery. Probably should have paid more attention in history class, but one of those, it was one of those conflicts in like East Asia. And then in the last third, completely different than the other two topics he touched on, he started talking about his grandfather and his great-grandmother. And the religious things have been pretty prevalent throughout the album so far. But on that last third of the song, he sounded bitter. Like he was talking about how much his grandfather did for the church. And pretty much it seemed like it was all for nothing. And then he talked about his great-great-grandmother being a witch. And he sounded angry there too. It sounded like his great-grandmother was being outcast for being a witch. But like when the people in her city needed something that was outside the scope of their own religion, they went to her. I don't know if that's literal or metaphorical, but thought-provoking for sure. This is Fuchsia Green.
Distant, shoes off at the temple entrance. Resin wood burn like Solomon. She fancies collars when swallowing. Capsizing silences. Horror Babylon. All city metropolitan. Let me order today. A war fuchsia.
Sometimes I don't know what he be talking about, but his delivery is sick.
Question prophet and the mighty. She called him Habibi, but son will still catch a body from the gun mid-robbery. Ghetto see dentures in the jar. Knew the night would be special. I'm a vessel. Give my girlfriend rods the bloody end like the Ceausescu's.
Alright, that was a really interesting song. I like the drums and I like the bass line of that song a lot. The verses themselves were super interesting because they described these, from my analysis, sound like really mundane experiences. They didn't describe too much more than the girl coming over, but in those specific little details, they use a really twisted way of describing the girl. So with the Lucis verse, he used a lot of like goddess imagery. So I guess his wasn't really negative, but with Billy Woods, he described the girl like he knew it was going to be a good night because she had her dentures on the nightstand. Like, is this an old woman? It could be playing off of a Lucis verse and like that being the oracle. You know, the oracle's normally older women. But he also had this imagery of, instead of saying they were like Bonnie and Clyde, he was using this imagery of this dictator and they got killed together from a firing squad. He also said he was raised in a cesspool. I wonder if this is going to play to any of the other album, but I just like how out of the box the storytelling is. And I like the chemistry from Billy Woods and Lucid. They should have good chemistry all the times they work together. But this is classical music. Of course, classical music gonna have keys. They don't sound like classical keys though. They sound really good though.
Yo, whenever it's legalese, religious lectures, first quarter weather, material pleasures, I receive the haze, eager to see, filled with cease, desist minds, anything to thought, cerebral lights, anything to convey clearer, fiendish folk.
This is interesting. His verse, he was really describing conflict between chasing something. It sounded like he was describing chasing a rap career, but the amount of conflict that he was talking about, it has to be something else on top of that. I got a little bit of like drug dealing imagery too. So it could have been him describing being between chasing a rap career and getting money in the streets. But he never explicitly said, he just called it in those opening lines. And he described himself chasing it. Maybe Billy Woods' verse will give me more insight.
88 keys, I played the piece till it fell to pieces. Chasing ghosts, chasing ghosts.
He's talking about him playing 88 keys. It could be that. It could be him torn between music and the street life. Because 88 keys could have a double meaning, like piano keys, but you know, kilograms.
I really find my place, pressing. Always disappointment etched every line in her face, every wiry grade. Still disappointed today. Piano hands used to say, what a waste. Sunday was Amadeus's 20.
Sound like he's talking about literal piano now. He's talking about piano lessons.
We didn't go to church, through the heavy shades, light poured by the Lord's grace. I watched her play, gods filled the place, rich chords, desolate shores, where arpeggios break. I never quite found my way, it was always the same, I never had faith. My twin found Jesus, I sifted seeds out to shape.
That's trippy. That's trippy. With Billy Woods, there's always another layer. So even in those opening bars, the first like 10 bars, he was describing being late to piano lessons and not taking piano lessons seriously. But it seemed like as he got deeper in the verse, the piano lessons were just a symbol for the bigger idea of staying on the straight and narrow. He talked about like the piano teacher being in church, and I think him missing piano lessons was like him straying away from religion. And then as he got to those last bars in the verse, he went to describing getting caught in a raid and not wanting to flush the work down the toilet. So it seems like that chorus when he's talking about playing 88 keys, that could have been a reference to both piano and kilos. Some of that is me hypothesizing and taking my best guess. But I think that's where he was going with that song. I'm a fan of it, and of course he got the keys to accentuate all of that. This is Cossack Wedding.
Disaster tourists wandering Chernobyl's wildlife flourish. She said it herself, you gotta hold something back, that's insurance. That sarcophagus cracked, the purest radiation flew out my phone jack like a current. A snap of a collarbone, black raw strap, never nothing lurid.
That's tough. He was describing Chernobyl in those first few bars, but it sounds like he was just using that to describe maybe New York. He was talking about the radiation in his cell phone. Billy Woods don't strike me as a 5G is the government giving us radiation type conspiracies. I think that was kind of just a metaphor of him describing either New York or whatever area he's in as being desolate, like he got hit with a nuclear accident.
Those cold wars, you need endurance. Dead fish, wild boars, swollen with tumors, snippets of dialogue.
Still playing this imagery.
Aqueous humor. Cold creeping in my bones, wind whip around my home. She came when I'm sleeping, breast leaking, pussy unkempt. Around her the light bent, split hitting right, light like an opium den.
Interesting. Really interesting. I touched on that first verse. The second verse has to be a big metaphor, but I can't put my finger on what it's a metaphor for. He was describing this woman coming into his house, and just the way he was describing it was like the wild coming into his home. And then it morphed into this imagery kind of playing off of some of the conflict that had been happening, lesser known conflicts in like Eastern Europe. He was mentioning Chechnya. He was talking about the Red Army. And then all of the like environmental imagery was like being out in the mountains and like being out in the snow and the cold. He's had a couple of songs where it highlighted a woman, an unnamed woman, and I feel like it might be a little common theme that he's going to play into a little bit more. This is Schism.
Ashtrays overflowed. This shit I wrote, you can't do it on the phone. Maybe a little limerick, my poems need to beat the murder, still claim gang. Opposition caught him lacking, let it bang. God bless the dead, but we not talking about Dr. King. Your man's been doing too much, your man's did every damn thing. Run him out of town like Mormons. I ran out of town in a pair of Jordans. Run me up at the strip club everywhere I'm touring. Run it up, ain't my fault, y'all team ain't scoring.
I didn't even know this nigga toured.
Runs contrite till I had the crown. I was tight till those flights touched down. I was right all along when I told the crowd. Wait.
That verse felt really cryptic to me, but I think it might be a throwback to his first verse where he mentioned leaving New York City, kind of escaping that concrete jungle landscape. He made a lot of poetry reference, but I think that might be a symbol for him with his music. I mean, his music kind of is poetry, but I think that was a symbol for his music, and like the touring is him escaping New York.
48, Raffy. Still early, don't get sleepy on me.
Of course, this nigga gonna change the beat.
Drugs.
This beat sounds like one of the beats off of Aethiopes. Oh, I can't remember the song, but the little bagpipe sounding sound sounds like one of the earlier songs on there.
It's like your first time catching a contact. The killer shit, my penmanship is beyond combat. You benefit from dealer shit, then take my that. Or else you coming out of the crib to get shot at.
Hey, you know I love me some rhyme schemes. He getting his bag right here. I haven't heard of this guy before, Fat Ray, but he's using this cadence. He has a rhyme scheme to match where he's using this 3-syllable rhyme scheme 2 times in the beginning of the line. The dealership rhyme scheme, he's using that twice. and then he has a separate 2-syllable rhyme scheme at the end, or at least that's how he opened the verse. That's tough to me.
So we can make cash. Cuddy made off with your Rico parked on the front grass. Boy said when he catch you, you know he got you a toe tag. Boxing with these doctors, they hitting niggas with 4 jabs. No hard feelings, I'm in this bitch with the nomads. Bold drug dealers ain't telling niggas to blow bad. Powder mildew, he ain't recognizing the grow bad. Shout out to the bloggers for analyzing the vocab.
That's me. I be analyzing the vocab. That was it. Okay, I think I see where he was going. Billy Woods was talking about being on tour and being a rapper and making it as a rapper. And then Fat Ray's verse was crazy because he was describing this scene of pretty much niggas running down on a rapper. It sounded like a robbery gone wrong, but there was definitely a scene where the rapper I assume got shot, and he was in the hospital fighting for his life. So if that does in fact play into the first song, like I was thinking, sounds like this nihilistic story of Billy Woods thinking he escaped the danger of where he grew up in just to die because he had so much money. I love how the beat changed and got more dreary with Fat Ray's verse too, especially given the content matter of his verse. This is Frankie.
Morningside Heights. For back then, the building was nice. Old biddies out front with the watchtower ask if you know price. She buzzed me up. Elevated grind and hiccup. Pray it don't get stuck. I had the Cuban cut. Whole floor smelled like Nal Champa. Shoes at the door. Her roommate was Shanta. Little stuff in here they found on the street. I helped carry that TV. Stupid big. Corner apartment, the sun run riot. French doors, hardwood shining to where the sun got tired. Frankie looking like she might just burst in the fire. Summer months burning by the sun. The cookie teachers made him.
Yo, I feel like there's such a build up with this album because each time he mentions this girl, they get so intense. Just how emphatic his delivery is. It sounds like something's bad gonna happen, but it doesn't. But anyway, with this song, we see these 2 different houses being described. Sounds like 2 different places he lived in New York. So he described in vivid detail the first house, and it seemed like a house he lived in his adult life, and then he's describing moving to this second house, and this time with his girl who he's seeing at this time, Frankie. Still can't help but think that this girl is some kind of symbolism for something bigger. Maybe we'll get that on a later song on the album, but at least we got a name for her now. If it is the same girl, this is Pollo Rice.
This thing was broke from the jump. No point going back and forth over who did what. My character arc rolling loud to Shakespeare in the park. You get stabbed, stagger off in the dark.
That's a crazy contrast. He's saying his style is rolling loud to Shakespeare in the park. He's described himself as a poet early in this album, but just the contrast of, rap music that's played at rolling loud, and his style is a stark contrast to that.
Stack will turn to Scandi and man at arms. A little gas, crash dummies flying out the cars. Hospital vending machine, detours to Cheetos. New Year's Eve, I snuck in the Clico. Pollo Rico, you can find
This is a hospital scene from a car accident, sound like. I think he mentioned a car accident earlier in this album too.
When the revolution was over, they gave them half what they promised. Let's be honest. And the ones who bust their guns went home to 10 cups of tea, that same plate of porridge. Let's be honest. Wake up, think about the ones they left in the forest. There's no church in the wild.
That's a dreary song. First verse sounded like he was sending off a friend. A friend was dying in the hospital. The scene he kept going back to was getting some Cheetos in the vending machine. And then that chorus is daunting, talking about hope is love in the afterlife. But then he threw me for a complete loop to where he was describing this war scene where there was a whole bunch of dead bodies. It seemed like the revolution wasn't even worth it. That plays into some of the earlier imagery he had on the album, where he had a lot of talk about revolutions, not just like social revolutions, but actual war revolutions. He mentioned some of those conflicts in Eastern Europe. I don't know if he's had a family member who's from one of those backgrounds who's fought in one of those conflicts, but it's been a pretty prevalent thing. And anytime he mentions death, it seems like he goes back to that revolution and war imagery. The song felt sad overall. This is all jokes aside. Oh, this sax and piano combo is pretty sick.
Marciano on a snow day, Coldplay, math rock, soda.
Nigga, shout out to Rock Marcy.
Case, Mr. Serve on from back in the day. I've been around since long, I got a couple names. Pragmatic is the metric system, but this America might have to throw it all away in an instant. Over an insult, I turn the phrase.
Yo, that line is sick. He said pragmatic as the metric system, but he might have to throw it all away because it's America. Like the metric system, I ain't gonna lie, I was looking at the metric system the other day. The metric system better than whatever the heck we call this feet and inches system we use. But yeah, metric system is definitely pragmatic. He was describing himself as being pragmatic, and he was saying he might have to throw it all away because it's America. It's like, even though the metric system makes way more sense, you got to throw it away if you're in America because we don't use that over here. America. But that was like a double entendre for him describing his life being pragmatic, and he might have to throw his life away because if he gets into some conflict, he's going to have to act on it, and he could end up losing his life for it. Ugh.
I'm squatting on stage, hoping I never took more than I gave.
Man, these last few songs have felt like
All jokes
eulogies.
aside, I enjoyed the ride. I miss my guys, took the church and put it in the sky. All jokes aside, I
See
enjoyed
what I'm
the
saying?
ride. I miss my guys, took the church and put it in the sky. Say what you want, but show me the lie. The laws I enforce is maritime. We wavy, yes or no, no maybes, that type of time.
Whoa, this last third of the album has just been emotional and sad. The beat was basically crying, and it's like that first verse he was sending off, I think his grandma. I think he was reminiscing on his grandma, who I'm assuming recently passed, just based on the language he was using that first verse. But then that second verse, it seems like he was talking about a romantic relationship. He was going back to that mysterious woman. It could be Frankie that he mentioned in the song with that same title, or it could be a symbol for something else. But it seems like the relationship is over. His delivery was really emotional of it. He seems torn about it. I'm hoping with the last song being called Magdalene, obvious reference to Mary Magdalene, bringing back in these religious themes, that it's a reveal of who this woman is. But yeah, in the first few songs, this relationship with this woman seemed like the woman was a threat or predatory, or it was tied into these warlike imageries. And then on this last 1-2 songs, seems like the relationship is over. It seems like it might be your actual woman that he's reminiscing on. So let's get into this last track, Magdalene. Okay. I did not expect this last beat to be upbeat. The little choir is dope.
I like it like butter. Suck my dick and tell me I'm beautiful. How I wake up in the jar's been the usual. What's sacred, what's super.
Yo, this beat is sick. The guitars that's playing under this little vocal sample is crazy. And then the vocals itself seems like this African choir.
Weighing carbons, karma. Don't tell me who you are, I'm asking who you are. All city, tell me where you want it. I'll be there in the morning.
And I'm yours, and the line went dead. Put Brad on the phone, she said the same in the text. Bro said she don't want to be sad, get it through your fucking head. Eat water pack, grimace to the case, couldn't finish. Wheels spinning, car full of ghosts, HOV lane, coast right off the interstate. Straight to voicemail, it's a familiar rage. Far from home, but it's a familiar place. GPS my fate, human remains when you dredge those lakes.
Dang, well there it is. It felt like each of these last few songs just had this build up of tension. Every time he was talking about this girl, it was just more and more build up. And listen to this last song, I do think this was a literal relationship that he was describing. I mean, obviously not real because it sounds like he died in the story. Well, maybe he a real nigga, he survived the crash. Maybe he built different. But yeah, that was a somewhat gut-wrenching closer to the album. Him describing this toxic relationship and him pursuing this girl and taking this trip to go link up with her. They don't seem like they're on good terms, and he takes a break on this long drive trying to text her. She's not responding, and he ends up crashing his car. To me, with just how the song was going and the vibe I was getting from the song, sounded like he wanted to crash the car, or at least he was open to dying in a car crash. But yeah, I'm sure I'll spend 10 listens trying to decipher if that woman that he spent a large portion of the album describing had a deeper meaning to it. Overall with this album, man, I love it. Now, take it with a grain of salt. I was spending so much time trying to sift through the lyrics. There were some elements of the album that I didn't catch. I love the soundscape and how this album sounded sonically. But admittedly, I was paying a little bit less attention to that than the lyrics. But man, Billy Wood's storytelling is just phenomenal. I love how he can hone in on these different themes. And with these last songs, I focus more on that relationship theme. But throughout the whole album, he really brought to light the song title and the album cover, where the album is called Church, and he had these religious themes littered throughout the song. But then with the album cover, it's just this urban building or skyscraper, presumably in New York, and he spent a large portion of the album talking about his upbringing in New York. I think he piggybacked off that upbringing to dive really deep into some of the inner city issues as well, and I appreciated that. Even though this album was as abstract as usual, I feel like this was a little bit more accessible than his Atheos album. I do think the Atheos album felt a little bit more grand, but I think the common themes throughout the album stuck out a little bit more than they did on his last album. Off one listen, I think this is just a slight notch under Atheos. I think Atheos is a legitimate album of the year contender. I think this is a top 10 album of the year, potentially top 5 album of the year. I'm gonna have to give a few more listens to really solidify that. But man, Billy Woods really cemented himself, making me look good for my take of that he's the best abstract rapper in the game right now. But just a dope project, really enjoyed it.